Hi everybody. I'm glad you could join us. My name's Rebecca Lee. I'm a white woman in my late 30s and I have wavy brown hair. And I'm wearing a dark green jumper with a scarf and my Global Donut Day badge. I'll be hosting today's panel. I'm sat in a pretty cluttered room in a cold tenement flat in Glasgow, Scotland. And we're going to be talking about our real world experiences on this panel. So I wanted to be real with everyone here straight away. Another real world thing that isn't obvious if you are looking at me is that I am invisibly disabled. I may slur my words today, which is why I am reading from a script to keep us on track. I've also been an unpaid carer to my dad during his terminal illness at a time where funding cuts deeply affected health and social care in the UK. And I've also been a young carer to my mum, who is hard of hearing since I was a child. I am the accessibility lead for Deal for Global Donut Day, and I'm also the founder of the Universal Recognition Movement, which you will have seen popping up on Deal's social media posts. The Universal Recognition community is made up of a growing number of marginalised deaf, disabled or neurodivergent creatives and community organisers around the world, some of whom are on today's panel and some are joining from home. The movement was created due to the varied barriers everybody witnesses our friends, families and communities facing on a daily basis. And I'm sure you at home will recognise some of these experiences and they may even be your own. The Universal Recognition Movement partnered with Deal on this project to start to improve the accessibility of Global Doughnut Day and Doughnut Economics events. That project blossomed into something brilliant thanks to the hard work and expertise of the people with me today on the panel, who I will introduce in just a moment. I'll briefly describe our setup today for folks who are listening in and aren't viewing the screen. We have a BSL interpreter for the audience, and we also have another interpreter who will be speaking for our panelist, Sahera. No one is spotlighted today, so you can see everyone in conversation with each other, whether they are signing and being interpreted or whether they are speaking. Some members of our panel might also choose to have their cameras off, as this offers them a more equitable and accessible experience. We may cover some tougher topics today, such as exclusion and experiencing low qualities of life, ableism and struggle. If you are personally affected by any of the issues raised, we really encourage you to have a trusted person or a group who you can confide in and talk to after the event. Our FAB panel represent a much larger group of experts who contributed to the project and paid advisory roles and co-creative workshops. I want to say a big thank you to everyone who is joining us today from home for your invaluable work. This panel event is happening as we all wanted to be able to chat publicly about the issues we are facing. We equally wanted to go beyond that and share some of the exciting ideas for dismantling those barriers and taking doughnut economics action. We wanted to encourage everyone at home to think over how you, your loved ones, and communities might benefit from tuning into your needs and how these accessibility ideas help us meet each other's needs. One of our Universal Recognition members, who isn't on the panel today, Terry Louise Brown, founder of Talks with MS, she really championed us celebrating each other and the work that we are making a start on. And that is the attitude with which I want to introduce our panel today. We are privileged to have them with us, and I will now invite everyone by name to introduce themselves. Adeel, would you like to start us off by giving your introduction?
Yeah, my name's Adeel. I'm blind and I'm a freelance accessibility consultant specializing around visual impairment. And I'm in my mid-30s and I've got short black hair and I'm Asian and I'm wearing a fleece blue colored top.
Lovely, thank you, Adeel. Calum, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Calum. I have muscular dystrophy and I'm a wheelchair user. I'm a freelance disability consultant who is working on a variety of projects, some involving accessibility, some about supported employment. and various other things. I'm white. I'm sitting in a white, sparsely decorated office, wearing a brown top, and I have blue eyes and brown hair.
Fab, thanks. Carolina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Carolina Escobar-Tello. I am the Schools and Education Lead at Doughnut Economics. I am white, non-European, originally from Colombia in South America. Sitting at home, I'm wearing a green top with a spotty yellow donut on my t-shirt with a yellow background and the logo of Doughnut Economics Action Lab behind me.
Lovely. Jenny, would you like to give your introduction?
Hi, I'm Jenny. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman with short dark hair in my late 20s. I'm a chronically sick and autistic freelance graphic designer and consultant.
Rob, would you like to give your introduction?
Hi, my name's Rob Shorter. I'm a white male in my late 30s. I'm the Communities and Art Lead at Adeel, and I'm currently in Amsterdam, and I'm sitting in front of a black and white picture of central Amsterdam and the Amsterdam Central Station.
Lovely. And finally, Sahera, would you like to give your introduction?
Hello, my name is Sahera Khan. I am Muslim and a British South Asian deaf and BSL artist actor. The wall behind me is white. My description: I am wearing a blue turban, a blue top with a blue jacket. I'm wearing black rounded glasses and my skin is light brown.
That's lovely. Thank you everyone for those introductions. So as you can see, we've got a really a big diverse group of people on the panel today. We're going to be chatting over 4 topics. The first one that we wanted to discuss with you was diversity and caring for real people. So people will notice that this is similar to the Nurture Human Nature, Chapter 3 of Doughnut Economics. And our first question that we wanted to chat over was, how do we overcome assumptions and invisibility of people's situations? And I'm going to invite Sahera to talk first on this topic and question.
How do we overcome assumptions and invisibility of people's situations? Make sure that accessibility is provided for people's needs. This creates a much better safety and trust.
That's lovely. Thanks, Sahera. Yeah, so that trust is really, really important. And when we provide accessibility for people's needs in the first place, that's when that trust can really be there, and people's invisible situations become more obvious because people can talk about them. So I think that's a really, really valuable thing to mention when we talk about people's invisible situations. Thank you. Calum, I just invite you to answer that question as well. I think you had some things to say on that, didn't you?
Yeah. So there was a survey in 2014 by Scope that showed that 67% of the non-disabled British public are not comfortable speaking with disabled people. And nearly half of those reported that they do not personally know anyone who has a disability. They were often scared that they would say something patronizing by mistake or offensive, or found it difficult to find common ground with people who have a disability. And I believe that this is one of the biggest barriers to breaking down the negative attitudes and the false narratives that confine many of disabled people's experiences. It puts a kind of artificial limit on who we can be friends with, who we can pursue relationships with, or who we can network with. So, I mean, that affects our social lives romantic lives, working lives. And it isn't up to us to always provide disability awareness training to everyone. We don't know for free. To an extent, it is non-disabled people's responsibility to educate themselves on disability, become allies of our community. That could take a number of forms. Books by disabled authors, following disabled people on social media, or looking for authentic representation in the media. But I think most of all, the most important thing is to make sure you include some disabled people in your social circle and to have face-to-face interactions. All it really takes is just an open mind and start the conversation. And just with a bit of patience, you'll learn about how to talk about disability and how to accommodate us, so on. So I think, like Doughnut Economics, it isn't just about the kind of systemic change. It's also about, a kind of cultural shift as well.
Couldn't agree more. And I love that both of your answers are all around, being sociable with each other and having trust with each other and ensuring that people educate themselves on accessibility. I think that's really important. Our next question on this topic is, how might we design economics or services with real people in mind and not use stereotypes or characters? Jenny, I think you had something to say about this, didn't you?
Yeah, so I think the issue is that assumptions are often made about what sick or disabled people need or want. And a lot of that comes down to a lack of diversity in the teams that are creating the products and services that we're using. Diverse teams will always produce more well-rounded ideas. And I think we need to ask ourselves, who's not in the room? There's no need to guess what people need or want. We can involve people in an equitable way from the beginning of these processes. It's important that we recognise not only who is involved in the decision making, but also crucially who isn't currently, and that we try to make sure that that is as inclusive and representative as possible.
Adeel, I think you also had other thoughts, didn't you?
Yeah, to design services with real people in mind, we need to start by consulting with them. So this means talking to a diverse range of people from different backgrounds and experiences. We also need to make sure that we talk to people at the start of a project, at the designs, that we talk to people at the design stage rather than later on in a project. So especially when it comes to accessibility, it's much easier to make a service or a product accessible at the design stage than later on, and trying to bolt it on later on. We also need to make sure that the actual consultation process itself is made accessible for everyone. So this, for example, can be done by making sure that we reach out to disability groups and community groups, as a lot of disabled people and minoritized people don't always have access or are able to read newspapers or social media. So we have to make the effort to connect with them. When it comes to making the actual consultations themselves accessible, we need to make sure that when requested, that we provide documents in accessible formats such as Word documents, that we provide tactile diagrams and audio descriptions for any images or diagrams. And if anybody needs sign language interpreters or translators, that we provide those. One big barrier to consultations is travel. So nowadays, Zoom can be a good option as opposed to physical meetings. When it comes to stereotypes, we need to be mindful that we don't use them in our designs. So rather than, for example, using a stock image of a wheelchair, we could use a variety of images that reflect the diversity of the whole disability community itself.
Yeah, and it's so much to think about that's really, really important. But even from that, and I think what you're both saying is from that initial step, we need to start thinking about it straight away. Otherwise, people can't be included in the first place. And it is that first step where we need to start thinking about it. I think, Rob, you have some perspective on this from Deal's perspective, don't you?
Thanks, Becky. Yes, so thinking about that question, and I'll just repeat it. How might we design economies or services with real people in mind and not use stereotypes or characters? I've been reflecting on this within Doughnut Economics. And if I think of the donut asks, how do we meet the needs of all? That's the first part of the donut, really. And I think the first step in that question is to really tune into your own needs. I think then when we do that, and we slow down and really listen to that, we're more likely to be able to slow down and listen to the needs of others. And it's that listening that I think is so important. And my invitation to communities engaging with Doughnut Economics is to think about the ways you can slow down and tune in with your own needs, then listen to the needs of different folks across the community. I believe that is a process, is a connecting one, a beautiful one, an ongoing one, and one that will set an amazing foundation for your collective work together.
It's just taking how we find those initial steps and the initial ways that we're going to start these processes, isn't it? How are our communities diverse, and how does this affect what we need as families, friendship groups and communities? I think, Carolina, you had something to say on this, didn't you?
Thank you, Rebecca. So my contribution to this session really comes from that diversity, my own positionality of disadvantaged or oppressed members of society. So in my case, a migrant from the global south. So when we're talking about disabled or marginalized people, my acute awareness of the cultural differences across different places around the world, from villages to mega cities, is, like going huge lights, bling, 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 sirens everywhere, because many people worldwide, and this diversity that we have, are facing challenges that include things like conflict, which is everywhere around the world, violence and unsafe conditions where you don't have the freedom to share what you really think, and where even the right to life is violated. So there is simply no capacity to enter and engage with ideas that ask more than that immediate survival, unless it's made accessible in that diversity.
And yeah, so important. We could talk on that subject. It could be a whole talk in and of itself. It's so important. I'm going to have to move us on in the conversation, but yeah, I really do want folks at home to reflect on this when we're tuning into our needs and the needs of our communities, and how access affects survival. And then, working on, we want to be aiming for higher than that, don't we? That's the bare minimum. Our next topic is how we share knowledge and ideas. This is reflected, I think, in the Design to Distribute chapter of the Doughnut Economics book. Our first question on this topic is, what are the benefits or good things of having more accessible ways to communicate? I know, Sahera, you had some ideas on this.
So what are the benefits or good things of having more accessible ways to communicate? Sign language interpreters make a big difference to the deaf community. It's important for deaf and disabled people to have access, for example, BSL interpreters. If there are no interpreters, normal things like being at work, school, or in hospital can be difficult and unsafe. Using family members or children, such as coders, child of deaf adults, to interpret is not equal or safe. Having good access and interpreters can make a difference for deaf people and people from different countries.
It's so important, yeah, and it's one of the basic needs that the need is healthcare and being in hospital or being in school, and if you can't communicate in those settings, it can become quite dangerous. So it's a really, really important thing. Rob, again, you had some ideas on how this comes into the community works that you're doing with Deal.
Absolutely. When we think about the world we could create, we think about the ways everyone can be a part of reimagining the economy. So there's no one way to communicate that's right for everyone to be part of that conversation. So it's great to design many ways to communicate so that there is something for everyone. When we design ways to introduce the ideas of doughnut economics in a community or in a school, in order to explore their implications together, Carolina and I tried to think of different ways to do that, different methods, through games, through play, through speaking and in silence, through movement and in stillness. And we found that moving between these many ways to communicate makes ideas more accessible, but also it makes them more engaging and impactful. We find that people resonate with the ideas more when there are many ways to relate.
I think it makes everything much more innovative and exciting, doesn't it? When we include everyone and all their different ways of communicating, we can, really, really get to the heart of some of the issues and start to communicate better. Our next question is, can disabled or minoritized people help us think up new and interesting solutions to problems? And if so, why do you think this is? And do you have any examples? Jenny, I'd like you to invite you to answer this question first.
So I think a diverse team will inherently have a deeper, truer understanding of what solutions are needed because they'll have that varied mix of first-hand experiences. When you live in a society that isn't built for you, you have to find ways to problem solve all day, even in ways that you don't realize you're doing. Marginalized groups are some of the most creative problem solvers because there isn't that larger national system to fall back on and to do it for you and to help you with it. That, of course, doesn't only apply to disabled people. We must work out ways together, and that's what we need more of. And that insight and experience can't be overlooked.
Adeel, I think you had some ideas on this question as well.
I wanted to give an example specifically relating to the blindness community, but it kind of shows how sometimes the disability community can solve its own challenges and issues. Blind people use screen reading software to access computers. Screen reading software is software that converts text on screen into speech, and commercial screen reading software can cost as much as £1,000. So blind people who live in the global south or are unemployed, that's pretty much out of their budget. Like in the mid-2000s, a blind computer developer based in Australia recognized that there was this cost barrier, and he set about developing a free and open source screen reader. It's called NVDA, and it's for the Windows operating system. And over the years, up till now, there's millions of people that are using it and have access to technology, education, and everyday tasks like online shopping, social media that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to do, and that's like something that a fellow blind user kind of recognized and decided to take action on. Yeah,
and it's brilliant because now so many more people can take part in, you know, everyday life, the normal bits of society that otherwise, you know, folks would not be able to, they'd be excluded from. And, you know, recognizing also that money barrier as well, it's so important. And it just goes to show how innovative and creative disabled people are. Not that we should prove ourselves, but, you know, I think people don't realize this. They don't realize that disabled people are often the people coming up with these kinds of ideas and innovations. Calum, you also had some ideas on this question, didn't you?
Yeah, to kind of add to what Jenny said, disabled people kind of bring to the table like experiences and insights that non-disabled people don't have. And I think this kind of helps improve collective decision making and disrupt groupthink. And as Adeel said, many of the solutions that are targeted at disabled people have intersectional uses for non-disabled people. So like when it comes to like drop curbs and elevators, it helps disabled people as well as parents with prams or delivery people. Accessible housing means that elderly people can live in their homes longer without support. Speech recognition software, even though it's commonplace with Siri and Alexa, has existed in its modern form since the 90s. That was originally designed for disabled people. Typewriters were invented for blind people because of the raised letters on the keys originally, and like remote work. It means that disabled people can work around their conditions, their care routines, and, you know, continue to earn money. But as you can see, during the pandemic, it helped everyone continue to work, or many people, through the lockdown.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, over the course of our lives, we're always going to have some experience of illness or disability, whether it's us personally or a loved one of ours. And yeah, it's so important to recognize that, you know, these things benefit our communities as a whole. Talking about communities, our next question is, what happens when communities whose ideas we don't often get to hear, so non-Western, not white, not European populations, for example, get to create themselves and join in the conversation? Carolina, I'd like to invite you to answer this question.
Thank you. When this happens, things are amazing, you know, glowing and sparkles. I really feel that when the real vast majority of the world, people around the world can join this conversation, always. The current tables that we sit around to make these decisions will need to be bigger, much bigger. New tables in different communities and places will need to be added as well. Recently, we had an example that was shared within the Adeel team of students at a recent Doughnut Economics session, and they came up with a strategy of countering the G20, which is this self-appointed group of the world's most powerful economies, with the D20, which are a group of nations that are closest to living in the donut. So here we have countries sitting around these tables that are positioned depending on how close they live to the donut. And here we would have very different countries like Costa Rica and Chile and Jordan and Mauritius, among others, winning that prize. So the world would look very different. And then we will then be listening to the voices of experts who are facing these challenges and are living life so differently, particularly in their current way of thinking and being and doing things. So it will be wonderful.
It's such an opportunity. We want it to happen. Our next topic that we have is, who are the experts on what is better for people? And this also can be similar and thought of in our Changing the Goal Chapter 1 and seeing the bigger picture in Chapter 2 of Doughnut Economics. Our first question on this topic is, disabled and intersectional communities often don't get to take part in big political decision making. How would you change that? Sahera, I think you had some thoughts, didn't you?
Disabled and intersectional communities often don't get to take part in big political decision making. How can you change that? I'm not a political person myself, but I think it's important to invite the communities to discuss local issues through a forum meeting. It's important to have people there who are either deaf, disabled, or from the LGBTQA+ community, those who have less money, or from ethnic minorities who have an interest in local issues. This allows them the opportunity for representation.
So important to have that representation. I couldn't agree more. And there will be people that are more interested than other people, but definitely if even if you're not political, if you don't have anyone representing you within your communities and you know, having political voice, that can be really, really problematic. So yeah, I completely understand that. Calum, you have a sort of bigger picture view on this as well, don't you?
Right. So I think it is vital to the health of democracy that we are represented in the political process, and the barriers to elected office for disabled people are removed. I think first it's about like our views and our experiences have to be reflected in the political decisions that impact the communities we're part of. And this has to be kind of done through like active and collaborative consultation. This has to be like more than a tokenistic effort. It has to be, and we have to be kind of financially compensated for our time and labor in these consultations. And second, when it comes to the barriers to elected office, there's a number of kind of forms of ableism that prevent us participating in party politics. Some of those are architectural, some of those are cultural, and some of those are systemic. I give some examples, like a party conference might not provide BSL interpreters or information in Braille. They're like inaccessible streets and public transport can make canvassing voters very difficult. Or we might fear that being involved in politics might put us at risk of benefit sanctions, for example, or perhaps in campaigning that our impairments will be exploited and kind of used against us in a way, or there'll be negative attitudes of the public or party members in terms of our ability to fulfill a role representative. And I think another barrier that's been more recently created is the UK used to have something called the Access to Elected Office Fund, and that was to help with the expenses of running a political campaign, essentially. That was scrapped in 2020 and has been put in review ever since. So obviously it's not considered particularly important to support us to do that. So that has to be restored as well.
Now, this was the point in the recording where few of us lost connection, which meant that a few questions were missed. So we're putting this extra bit of recording in now because we really, really want people to be able to answer the questions that they didn't get to in the live panel event. The reason this feels extra important is because how we organised this session and curated it was that from the workshops that we did with our experts who also have lived experience of disability, being deaf or neurodivergence, they chose what questions and answers they would feel would be most important to share with an audience. So we can't miss any of those out. So please excuse the costume change in the middle of this recording. Everyone's going to be in slightly different rooms, wearing slightly different things, and then we'll go back to the original recording for you. And it's just to make sure that everybody gets to be to express their opinions on the topics that were so important to us. So with that in mind, our next question is, what do you think would change if more disabled and marginalised people were treated as experts when making services or political decisions? And I would like to invite Adeel to answer this question because I know he had something really important to say.
It would make society more equal and fair. Disabled and marginalised people have the best understanding of their needs and the challenges they face. They should have a say in the decisions that affect their lives, to ensure that services and policies are designed to meet their needs. For example, in the United Kingdom, the establishment of the legislation known as the Disability Discrimination Act 1995 came about as a result of mass protests by disabled people. Over 100,000 people took part in the protests in some way. The legislation finally made it illegal for employers and service providers such as shops and restaurants to discriminate against someone because they were disabled. A more recent example of how disabled people have used their expertise to make a difference is in the campaign to stop the closure of ticket offices at rail stations in the United Kingdom. The government announced plans to close hundreds of ticket offices, arguing that they were no longer needed in the age of online ticketing. However, disabled people and other groups argued that the closure of ticket offices would make it much more difficult for people with disabilities to travel by train. Disabled people led a vigorous campaign alongside other stakeholders to stop the closures, writing to their MPs, local newspapers, and train companies. They also organized protests and demonstrations. As a result of this campaign and the overwhelming response, the government have reversed their decision and agreed to keep ticket offices open. This change wouldn't have just affected disabled people. Older people and people who don't use technology would have been affected by these closures, not to mention all the job losses that would have occurred had these changes gone ahead. This example shows how the expertise of disabled people can be used to make society better for all.
I think that point is so important, Adeel, because it highlights how people just living their everyday lives can really influence political decisions that can make things better for everybody. And that's such an important point to make, because it shows, how politics is everybody, and how we shape society around us. And fantastic that we as disabled people had so much influence over policy that now benefits everybody. It's really, really important to celebrate that and celebrate that good change that we managed to make. Now, our next question is, how might you and your community make services better and fairer for everyone? And I know, Jenny, you had some thoughts on this topic, so I'll invite you to answer the question.
So mutual aid and peer support practices show us that amazing things happen when people come together, when we respect each other's access needs and try our best for one another and recognise that this isn't a process that's perfected one time. It's a commitment to continuing to learn and grow and push for better. People often think that access needs are something that only applies to disabled people, but everyone has needs. It's just that society is set up to cater to some people's needs and not to others. And if you've never had your access needs denied, you might not consider that you have access needs at all. And I'd urge everyone to reconsider that, because we're not that different really, and things can be so much better than this for everyone.
I think that's absolutely right. Like when we start thinking about what everyone's needs are, access is a huge part of that, and it just improves everything for everybody, doesn't it? It's such an important part of this conversation. And our next topic is, how do we look after the planet and make sure that that continues? And our first question under that topic is, what effects what disabled and marginalised people need to buy to live well? Are ethical shops, food items, clothes or services, for example, accessible to us? Sahera, I know you had some thoughts on this subject, so I'll invite you to answer that question first.
To make things safer for the planet and buy things that don't make pollution, shops need to be accessible and local to people. Information must be accessible. The more information people have, the more they know what is safe. And to do this, you need to provide a range of accessibility, for example, BSL interpreters and visual information.
And that is absolutely right. The barriers and things that are there mean that these kind of choices aren't accessible to us as individuals. And it's really, really important that we need access to be there if we want people to make more ethical choices. Jenny, I think you have a slightly different viewpoint on whose behaviour might need to change to enable everyone to act differently. So I'd love to invite you to talk more about that.
Yeah, while it's so important that everyone has access to information regarding the different options that are available to them, I also think we need less policies and campaigns that focus solely on lowering individual carbon footprints. We have viral posts online that talk about how ridiculous it is that there's so much pre-prepared fruit and veg in plastic on the supermarket shelves without a consideration for the fact that that makes it more accessible to lots of people. It's simply labelled as lazy. We've got companies that now secure the bottle tops to larger plastic bottles of juice so that they can get recycled together, but it makes it much harder for many disabled people to open and close the bottles. Of course, smaller individual actions can add up and make a difference, but not at the rate of large-scale structural changes, like overhauling our country's recycling systems or looking at the packaging materials large companies are using in the first place. We're often putting more pressure on individual citizens instead of the large companies and our governments. As Calum mentioned in one of our previous workshops, we ban plastic straws when we know that so many disabled people need them for a variety of reasons, instead of analysing the larger impact of commercial fishing nets, for example. Like many things, we have been purposefully redirected to focusing on each other as individuals and not on the mass corporate issues at play. Unfortunately, disabled people often pay the price for that.
Absolutely, and it's all that it being on the individual that's causing, I think, a lot of the problems. We're not looking at it in terms of like the bigger systems and things that like Doughnut Economics teaches us to look a little bit at the bigger picture. This is really showing how that applies when it comes to environmental issues and disability and people's just capacities to change things on a bigger scale. Really, really invaluable point. Our next question is, if you were to design something new or make a change to a service or policy that was good for the disabled community and the environment at the same time, what would that new thing or change be? And I think, Adeel, you had some really good ideas on this. So I'd like to invite you to answer the question first.
This is more UK oriented, but one change that would be beneficial for the disabled community and for the environment would be to expand the public transport infrastructure. So when it comes to trams, buses, trains, and link them together more seamlessly. For example, at the moment, if I go into London, I can jump on an overground train and then from there quickly jump on an underground and then from there catch a bus, and it is very seamless in London. But as soon as you step outside the capital, it kind of falls apart. So like in an ideal world, a blind user, for example, would be able to catch a bus from a rural area and go into a city center, like into a transport hub that would be fully accessible and would have staff to assist if required. And from there, they'd be able to switch to another mode of transport, for example, tram, train, or carry on with another bus journey. And the building itself would be accessible. So it would have, for example, tactile wayfinding lines on the floor for blind users, so they could navigate around the building by themselves. It could have braille signage on stands and have audio announcements, so people could tell when departures were taking place, and have ramps and disabled toilets, etc. Yeah, so I think at the moment in the UK, there's no overall joint policy when it comes to expanding public transport and linking it all together. So and that would make it accessible for disabled people when it comes to accessing public transport, and also help with reducing the UK's carbon footprint. And it would also make society more equitable for everyone. Yeah.
Okay. I do have something else to say about the same question. So I was going to talk about the concept of 15-minute cities, right? So that's basically where residents can meet all their basic needs within a 15-minute walk of their home. And this point also applies to low traffic neighborhoods and other strategies for reducing carbon emissions. If accessibility is not factored into this kind of move to more sustainable neighborhoods, it will have a disproportionate negative impact on disabled people. So accessibility has to be one of the guiding principles behind that. Local infrastructure, public spaces, and businesses have to be accessible so that disabled people are not either forced to travel further by car, increasing their carbon footprint, or are excluded from their community that they're part of. Pedestrianised zones have to be suitable for wheelchairs. Shops and homes have to be step-free. Cycle lanes have to be wide enough to accommodate adapting bicycles. And I think it doesn't just like expand the possibilities for disabled people and play a part in the green transition, but it also means that elderly people can live in their homes for longer without the need for additional support and can remain part of their community for longer. So I think another thing about this is I can talk about 15-minute cities meeting everyone's needs. Another one of those needs that I believe is equitable access to nature. And this has to be integrated into this and approaches to public health. So, I mean, nature is a place where all of us should be able to experience the mental health benefits of connection for nature. as well as exercise or socialize for free or low cost. And one of the solutions that I recently realized is elevated boardwalks. So basically that would allow disabled people to explore natural environments without actually harming the habitat below. That could be beaches or marshland or riverbank or woodland, and make it much more accessible for wheelchairs and even blind people or elderly people who can't have difficulties walking. So it kind of avoids the disruption that is caused by foot traffic, and that means damage to vegetation or soil erosion, compaction, scaring away wildlife, and it also makes nature like more accessible at the same time. And it kind of goes to show that kind of conservation efforts and rewilding efforts do not have to be counter to accessibility. There are innovative solutions that achieve both.
Thank you. So we're actually coming to the end now in perfect timing, and we're sorry to have lost Rebecca, but in the spirit of wrapping up in time, I'm holding this very precious feeling in this very moment of all of us being one amongst our commonalities and our differences. So thank you very much to all the panel for being here and widening the voices that should always be present in our continued journey towards things that are fairer for people and safer for the planet, and everything that underpins that process. So the transition that we need is difficult and will not be achieved just by a few people. And the most beautiful thing about all the questions and discussions that we've heard today, this evening, is that undeniable shared experience, that everything is intertwined, our needs, yours and mine, and we are going to need each other if we are to find that courage to arrive where is truly needed. So with that, I would like to say thank you, and I'll hand it over to Rob just to finish us off before we close.
Actually, to Rebecca, who's with us again.
Oh, you're back! Sorry, I couldn't see you.
That was the biggest technical hiccup I've ever had on a Zoom call. I don't know what happened, but it's lovely to be back with you, and I look forward to hearing what everybody said in the recording. I just wanted to give a final bit of signposting and thank you. So this is not everything that we could have said on all these topics, and that was partly the point. We wanted to start the conversation and share the ideas that aren't often shared on general topics. It will not be everything that our communities and loved ones struggle through or feel passionately about. This is only the beginning of the conversation. This panel is only one of the outcomes of the whole project of work that we've all been working on, and others behind the scenes. I'd like to invite everyone who is watching to please take a look at our local organiser and community toolkit linked in the webinar. You can download your own copy to work with in your community. You can also join the Universal Recognition Movement online. We're on LinkedIn and we're on Instagram to discuss things more, to join if you're part of marginalised communities that would like more of a platform. The links are also in my bio and the bio for the panel event. If you want to carry on this conversation, this very, very important conversation, you can go to the Global Cafe now, where there will be a global community, and you can continue the conversation on accessibility there. We've got another document also linked in our links section, where all the questions on these topics that we didn't manage to get to today, because there were so many more that we wanted to speak about but couldn't, they're in there. You can use them as a prompt, download them, use them to generate more conversation. And finally, massive thank you to our panel for your passion and your work and innovation throughout this whole project and on these topics live today. It takes a lot to speak about these things when you are directly impacted, and we can't overstate that. Thank you for your work. You have been that you've been able to share with us, and everyone in the audience and the communities, thank you for being here. Please take care of your needs, your loved ones' needs, and your communities around the world. We all face communal barriers, and that means taking communal care of our shared needs together. Thank you everyone for coming, and a final round of applause for everyone on the panel and at home before we say goodbye. So thank you everybody.
Thank you everybody.
Thank you.